He had always known that God was listening to his prayers. There had never been a moment in his life when he doubted the connection he had with the divine. It was a certainty that had been ingrained in him from an early age, something that guided him through the ups and downs of life. His faith had always been his foundation, his anchor in a world that often felt uncertain. Every prayer, every moment of devotion was an act of trust, a reaffirmation of his belief that God was there, guiding him through life. But that day, everything changed. The storm had come unexpectedly. It began as a normal downpour, something he had seen countless times before. But as the hours passed, the rain only grew heavier, the winds stronger, and soon the sky turned an ominous shade of dark. What started as a typical storm turned into something more. The floodwaters began to rise, and with them, a sense of dread that started to creep into his heart. He had never imagined that something so ordinary could feel so threatening. But now, as the water reached his ankles and the rain pounded relentlessly against the walls, he felt a deep unease settle in his chest. In the midst of this chaos, he began to question everything he had once known. Was God truly with him in this moment? The fear, the uncertainty, the rising water. He couldn't feel his presence anymore. It was as though his prayers were no longer heard, his cries lost in the storm. The very foundation of his faith felt like it was crumbling before him. How could this be happening? Why had God allowed this to happen to him? The doubt began to consume him, making him question whether God had truly been with him all along, or if it was just something he had convinced himself of. And then, in the darkest moment, when he had almost given up all hope, something shifted. It wasn't immediate, nor was it loud. It was subtle, a warmth that began to spread through him, a presence that seemed to fill the room. The storm, the fear, the rising flood, they all seemed to fade into the background as a light appeared before him. It was a light like no other, soft but undeniable. It wasn't the blinding light of a storm, but something deeper, more profound. In that moment, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: peace. He didn't know what it was or why it had come, but he couldn't deny that it was there. The feeling of being seen, of not being abandoned, was overwhelming. But then came the realization that perhaps, just perhaps, God had been with him all along, even in the moments when he thought he was alone. He had been searching for God in the midst of chaos, but what if God had been there, quietly, patiently waiting for him to open his heart to the truth? The question hung in the air. Should he believe it? Could this revelation change everything? How would he live with the truth that had been shown to him in such an unexpected and miraculous way? Adam Hamid was 32 years old, born and raised in Damascus, Syria. From an early age, he was deeply rooted in the teachings of Islam. His father, a respected figure in their community, had instilled in him a reverence for the faith, and his mother, a woman of quiet strength, had always emphasized the importance of knowledge and devotion. Adam's childhood was filled with the sounds of Quranic recitations and the quiet prayers of his family. It was in this environment that he first learned the sacred rhythms of Islamic life. Prayers at dawn, the call to prayer echoing through the streets, the gentle hum of devotion that shaped every moment of his youth. At the local university, Adam pursued Islamic theology, immersing himself in the study of the Quran, Hadith, and the rich history of Islamic scholarship. It was there that he found his calling. His teachers, impressed by his intellect and deep commitment to the faith, encouraged him to pursue a path as a religious leader. By the age of 24, Adam was appointed as the Imam of a small mosque in Damascus. His appointment was a testament to the respect he had earned in the community for his piety, wisdom, and ability to guide others in their spiritual journey. For the next several years, Adam dedicated himself fully to his duties. Each morning began with the early morning prayer, Fajr, a time of peace and reflection. His days were filled with leading prayers, delivering sermons, and teaching Quranic studies to the children of his community. He became a trusted guide, a voice of reason in times of uncertainty, and a pillar for those seeking spiritual direction. His life, while simple, was fulfilling. He found joy in the small moments, the shared laughter with his wife and children, the satisfaction of a well-delivered sermon, and the deep, resonant hum of the Quran as it echoed in the mosque during evening prayers. His home was modest but warm, nestled in a quiet neighborhood of Damascus. With his wife, Amina, and their two young children, life was orderly and peaceful. They had a routine, a rhythm that was comforting in its consistency. There were few disruptions, and Adam believed that the path he had chosen was the right one. He trusted that his purpose was clear, that his faith was solid, and that he was living in accordance with the will of Allah. Nothing seemed capable of shaking the tranquility he had built for himself and his family. Every evening, before bed, Adam would sit in quiet reflection, thanking Allah for the blessings of the day, for the peace that enveloped his home, and for the chance to serve his community. His faith was unwavering, his sense of duty clear. He believed that he had found his place in the world, and that nothing could challenge the certainty with which he walked his path. To him, life was a series of prayers and actions, each one reinforcing the other, building a life that was both spiritually rich and grounded in everyday blessings. He was content, believing that the light of Islam guided his every step. Adam had always believed that his faith would guide him wherever he went. And so, when the opportunity to work in a mosque in Houston, Texas arose, he saw it as a calling, a chance to serve the growing Muslim community in the West. The decision to leave Syria was not an easy one. It meant leaving behind the familiar faces of family, friends, and the serene life he had built. But he believed this move would broaden his horizons and allow him to contribute to something larger than himself. The warmth of the American Muslim community promised to be a new chapter in his life, a place where he could continue his mission. However, upon arriving in Houston, Adam quickly realized that things were not as he had imagined. The community, although welcoming, was vastly different from the one he had known in Damascus. The challenges were greater, the cultural differences more pronounced. While the mosque was a hub of activity, the people were often spread thin with the demands of adapting to life in a new country. Adam, though grateful for the opportunity, found himself feeling isolated. The comforts of home seemed far away, and the initial excitement gave way to a sense of loneliness. His mission to help the community, to guide and teach, felt daunting in a land so different from the one he had come from. One afternoon, as Adam tried to settle into the rhythm of his new life, the weather took a sudden and unexpected turn. What had started as a mild afternoon storm quickly escalated into something far more menacing. The clouds overhead darkened, swirling in a way that made Adam uneasy. It was as though the sky itself was closing in, suffocating the space around him. He stepped outside to assess the situation, but as he looked up, the first heavy raindrops began to fall, followed by a fierce wind that whipped around the streets. The intensity of the storm only grew, the rain falling in sheets, and the wind howling like a living thing. Adam could feel the pressure in the air, a heaviness that seemed to weigh on his chest, as if nature itself was testing his resolve. He retreated inside the mosque, but the feeling of unease lingered. It was no longer just a storm. It felt personal, as though it were a manifestation of his inner turmoil. With the storm raging outside, Adam turned to prayer. It was in moments like these that he had always found peace, a refuge from the chaos. But as he stood to pray, something within him shifted. The words of the supplication that had always flowed so easily felt foreign now. His mind wandered, his focus fractured. The storm outside, the unfamiliarity of his new life, the uncertainty about his mission, All of it seemed to intrude on his connection to Allah. For the first time in years, Adam found himself questioning his faith. The storm, once a natural occurrence, now mirrored the turmoil in his heart. The feelings of doubt, the loneliness, the fear of the unknown. It was all too much. In the midst of the storm, as the winds howled and the rain beat against the windows, Adam stood still, his heart heavy with the weight of his doubts. The feeling of connection that he had once taken for granted seemed to slip away, replaced by an overwhelming sense of emptiness. For a brief moment, he wondered if he had made a mistake coming here. The storm outside felt like a reflection of his inner storm, a reminder that nothing was as certain as he had once believed. As the hurricane continued to rage, the situation outside the mosque grew more dire. The winds howled and the rain fell in torrents, as though the heavens themselves were unleashing their fury on the earth. Adam and the small group of people who had taken refuge in the mosque huddled together in the dimly lit prayer hall, their faces filled with fear and uncertainty. With each passing hour, the storm intensified, and the floodwaters, which had already begun to rise, crept steadily higher. What had started as a mere inconvenience was now a full-fledged disaster. The mosque, once a sanctuary of peace and reverence, felt increasingly like a prison. The rising water flooded the floors, soaking prayer rugs and Quranic manuscripts, while the sound of the wind outside seemed to tear through the walls. The power had gone out, leaving them in darkness, with only the occasional flash of lightning illuminating the room in stark, fleeting moments. The feeling of isolation grew stronger with every minute that passed. Adam had always been a pillar of strength for those around him, but now, standing amidst the water and the chaos, he felt the weight of his own vulnerability. His thoughts began to spiral, and doubt crept into his heart. He had prayed for safety, for the storm to pass, but now, surrounded by rising water and the relentless noise of the tempest, he felt no peace. As the floodwaters reached knee level, Adam's fear grew. The once familiar surroundings of the mosque now felt foreign, threatening. He could no longer hear the comforting hum of prayers or the familiar voices of his congregation. Instead, all he could hear was the deafening roar of the wind and the sound of water lapping at the walls. His mind raced, but there were no answers, no comforting words from the Quran that could quell his growing anxiety. The physical danger of the rising floodwaters was matched only by the emotional and spiritual turmoil he was experiencing. He tried to pray, but the words felt empty, devoid of the comfort they had once provided. The peace he had always found in his faith seemed unreachable now, as if it had been swept away by the storm. The water continued to rise, inch by inch, flooding the mosque. Adam could feel his legs growing heavy, the water now reaching his waist. His thoughts became muddled. He looked around at the others, their faces stricken with fear, and realized that they too were losing hope. The mosque, which had once been a place of refuge, was now a prison, a symbol of their helplessness in the face of nature's fury. Adam wanted to offer comfort, to assure them that they were safe, but he knew deep down that there were no guarantees. He had led so many prayers here, had poured his soul into guiding others, but now, in this moment of crisis, he felt as though he was sinking alongside them. The storm outside had become a mirror of his own internal storm. The certainty he had once carried in his faith was now as uncertain as the rising floodwaters. As the floodwaters continued to rise, Adam felt a profound sense of hopelessness settle over him. The darkness of the mosque, now fully submerged in water, seemed to press in from all sides. The storm outside was a constant roar, and the desperate murmurs of the people around him only heightened his sense of isolation. His mind was clouded with doubt, his prayers felt hollow, and the faith that had once anchored him seemed to slip away with every inch the water crept upwards. In that moment of absolute despair, When it felt as though the weight of the world was about to drown him, something inexplicable happened. The air around Adam began to shift. It wasn't a physical change, but a spiritual one. A presence that filled the room, undeniable and overwhelming. The water, the storm, the fear, it all seemed to fade into the background, as if the very fabric of reality had shifted. Before him appeared a figure, standing amidst the rising waters, illuminated by a light that seemed to emanate from within. The light was soft, yet powerful, casting a glow that was not of this world. The figure was dressed in a simple white robe, and as Adam's gaze met his, he felt something stir deep within him. It was not just the figure's presence, but the compassion and peace that radiated from him. Adam's heart, which had been heavy with fear, began to stir with something he hadn't felt in what seemed like an eternity: hope. The figure did not speak, and yet Adam understood everything. In his eyes, he saw not just warmth, but the weight of human suffering, the pain of the world, and yet, paradoxically, a love so profound it seemed to encompass it all. It was a love that Adam had not known, a love that transcended everything he had ever understood about compassion and grace. The figure's gaze was steady and knowing, filled with understanding, yet it carried no judgment, no condemnation. It was as though the figure saw every part of Adam, every doubt, every fear, and still, the love in those eyes never wavered. Adam's heart raced as he stood frozen, unable to look away. In the silence that surrounded them, he felt the very fabric of his existence unravel and rebuild itself. This was not just a vision, he realized. This was real. The light was real. The presence was real. He could feel it in his bones. He knew in that moment that he was not alone. He had never truly been alone. And yet, he couldn't explain why this was happening or what it meant for him. What did this encounter mean for his faith? His life? He had come here to serve the Muslim community, to honor his path. But now, everything he had believed seemed to be called into question. But amidst the confusion, one thing was clear. This was a moment of profound revelation. This encounter, this presence, was offering him something deeper than he had ever known. It was a salvation that didn't align with the teachings he had followed his entire life, but it was a salvation nonetheless. And in that fleeting, radiant moment, Adam understood. This was not the salvation he had imagined, but it was a chance to step into something greater, something beyond what he had ever conceived. His life, he realized, was about to change forever. In the days that followed his encounter with the figure of light, Adam found himself in a state of deep reflection. The experience had left an indelible mark on his soul, one that he could not ignore. No matter how much he tried to focus on his duties at the mosque, the certainty he had once felt about his path, about his faith, was now a distant memory. The foundation that had supported him for so long seemed fragile in the wake of what he had witnessed. He began to realize that his entire understanding of faith, love, and salvation had been incomplete. For years, he had believed that the path to salvation was through strict adherence to the teachings of Islam, through following the rituals and laws that had been passed down through generations. But now, after what he had experienced, he saw that salvation was not merely about following rules. It was about the relationship one had with the divine, the love and compassion that transcended all religions, all boundaries. It was about the heart, the connection that bound him to something far greater than himself. His perception of the world around him had shifted. The people he had once viewed through the lens of religious division, those who followed different faiths, now seemed closer to him. He understood now that they too were seeking that same love, that same connection to the divine. The lines that had once divided him from others began to blur, and he felt an overwhelming desire to share what he had learned, to speak of the love and grace that had been revealed to him. But as much as he felt compelled to share this revelation, a deep fear settled in his chest. His entire life had been built on the foundation of his faith as an imam, the trust and respect of his community. How could he now betray that trust? How could he stand before them, knowing that the truth he had discovered would challenge everything they believed? The fear of rejection, of persecution, gnawed at him. He knew that his community might not understand, might even turn against him. His reputation, his life's work, could be destroyed in an instant. And yet, despite the fear, despite the uncertainty, Adam knew that he could no longer live in denial of what had been revealed to him. He had been shown something beyond the confines of religion, something that transcended all labels. He understood now that his path was not to follow a set of laws, but to embrace a deeper truth, a truth rooted in love, compassion, and the willingness to open his heart to the divine in whatever form it appeared. As he stood on the precipice of this transformation, Adam made the decision. He would speak. He would share what he had experienced, no matter the cost. The fear of rejection was real, but the fear of living a life of silence, of not living his truth, was greater. He was ready to face whatever came his way, to abandon the safety of the familiar for the uncertain path of authenticity. The change that had begun within him was now something he could no longer ignore. It was his new reality, and he had to walk forward in it, no matter the consequences. After weeks of internal turmoil, Adam reached a decision that would irrevocably change the course of his life. He knew, deep in his heart, that he could not turn back. The revelation he had experienced had transformed him completely. What he had once believed was now a distant shadow, and a new understanding had taken root in its place. He had been shown a love that transcended his previous understanding, a truth that could not be ignored. His faith, once grounded in the laws and practices of Islam, now blossomed into something more expansive, more profound. Returning to Houston, Adam faced the reality of his choice. The city that had once seemed like a place of uncertainty now felt like the ground on which he was meant to stand. He had no illusions about the difficulties ahead. His community, the very people he had devoted his life to serving, would likely reject him. They would see his conversion as a betrayal, an abandonment of everything they had believed him to be. But Adam understood now that this was the cost of truth, of living authentically. He knew that the path he had walked so far had led him to this very moment, and though it was not the path he had expected, it was the one he had to follow. He began teaching about Christianity, sharing the story of his transformation with anyone who would listen. At first, the words came slowly, but with time, they grew easier. He spoke not just of doctrine, but of the love he had encountered, the grace that had reached him in his darkest moment. He knew that his mission now was to convey this message, to tell others of the peace he had found, the peace that had been offered to him when he had felt most lost. As he spoke, Adam felt a sense of inner peace he had never known before. It was as though a heavy burden had been lifted from his shoulders. The questions that had once consumed him, about his faith, his purpose, his destiny, had been answered not through doctrine or ritual, but through a deep personal encounter with the divine. The journey that had begun with doubt and fear now felt complete. He was no longer the man who had left Syria to teach others. He was a man transformed, one who had seen the truth with his own eyes and felt it in his soul. Despite the pain of separation from his past, Adam knew that he had made the right choice. The road ahead would not be easy. He had already lost much, and there was more loss to come. Yet there was no fear in him anymore. The path he walked was clear, and he knew it was the path of truth. He had accepted Jesus into his heart, and in doing so, he had found a purpose greater than he had ever imagined. His life, which had once felt like a series of rituals and expectations, was now a story of redemption. a story that he was ready to share with the world. He had found the love and peace he had longed for, and nothing would stop him from spreading that message, no matter the cost. The journey had begun, and it was now his calling to lead others to the same truth.